Okay, so I lost the recording from last night's telephone conference, so I'm going to try to go through the steps of recreating this cabinet so that you'll have this video to refer to. So basically this is a cubby cabinet that has 3 different size compartments in it, and basically has some hardwood edging to cover up all of the joinery on the MDF, and you'll notice that it has dados and rabbets, slots for little pieces of what could be plywood or MDF. One thing to notice about this model is that there are an awful lot of instances of components. For instance, all of these shelves that I'm clicking on, this is all the same component. And I can demonstrate that by double clicking on one of them and go into the push-pull tool and pulling it up. And you're seeing that all of them are changing at the same time. Okay, so to draw this cubby cabinet, the first thing I'm going to do is to get the tape measure tool by pressing T, and I'm going to measure the width, which is 95 3/4. And I'll measure the depth, which is 12 inches. So I'm going to make a bottom shelf 95 3/4 by 12. So I hit R for rect, start stretching the rectangle in the direction I want to go, press enter, and then type in 95.75, comma 12. And then I will press P for push pull it up, and type in 3/4 of an inch. And then I want to get the select tool by pressing spacebar, triple click on it, right click, and make it a component. So basically almost everything in this model is going to be a component or a copy of a component. This bottom shelf is actually identical to this top shelf. So we'll take advantage of that by just drawing a component once and copying it around. So next I'm going to make the 2 sides, and this is also 12 deep, and the height is 47 inches. So I'll go ahead and make it right on top of this bottom component. I'll hit R for rectangle, stretch that over. And now this I want 3/4 of an inch. I'll type in 12 first, comma 3/4, and enter. So my rectangle is 12 deep, the depth of the cabinet, and 3/4 inches thick, the thickness of plywood. So P for push pull, and I'll just start this in an upward direction and type in 47 and press enter. And zoom out, and you can see that it drew it. Looks like the proper height. I'm going to shift spacebar to get the select tool, triple click, right click, and also make this one a component. Now you can see that this side is actually recessed a 1/4 inch into the bottom shelf. So there's going to be a rabbet, a slot in that bottom shelf for this side piece to sit in. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this side piece straight down. So I want to actually acquire the blue axis, which I had a little trouble getting, so I'm going to get it from here. Now I can align it on that outside edge, and I'll type in 1/4 and press enter. And I'm going to make a copy of that side. So it's already selected. I press M for move, and I'm going to actually click right here. The reason I'm going to start from this point is when I bring it over, I'll be able to click right here, and it will be in position 1/4 inch recessed down into the bottom shelf. If I started here, I wouldn't know exactly where to go, except if I stayed on this red axis, which is another way of doing it. But I'm going to show you that you can make things easier on yourself by selecting the proper point to start your move from. So I'm going to click there. Now I can tap the control key to leave a copy behind and move all the way across here And now I want to align to the top of the shelf, and I can show you that I'm recessed down 1/4 of an inch, so that's perfect. Okay, now I'm going to make a copy of this bottom shelf and tap the control key and move that up to the top. Now, same thing here on the top. You can see that the top is recessed 1/4 inch down into the side. So I'm going to move that, and actually you'll see that SketchUp sometimes will kind of snap to the last movement you made. If I moved 1/4 inch the last time I moved a component, it will automatically do that. So I didn't have to type in a dimension. I saw it pop up on the screen and I can click enter. But just to be safe, I'll measure that, and that's 1/4 inch. Okay, so we have the two sides and the top and the bottom, but I want to cut these rabbets, and I'll start by cutting in the bottom. So I'm going to double click to open up this bottom shelf. I'm going to get a rectangle and click on the upper left and lower right corner of this intersection. Get the push-pull tool and push it all the way to the back. And that cut the rabbet. On the other side, let me show you a different technique. Another way you could do the same thing is to get the line tool, and to make a line, I want to make sure that I'm back in this corner, so I zoomed in a little bit and draw it all the way to the front. And now if I use my hotkey to hide rest of model, which I've got set up as Control H, let me try that again, Control H, there we go. I can get the push-pull tool, and I can see where that line was drawn. I can push this down by 1/4 inch and press enter. And now I'll press Control H again, which unhides the rest of model, and I can see that that's properly set. Okay, now the top shelf is a copy of that bottom component, and the rabbet got cut on each side, but looking at this, you quickly realize that you want to flip that top shelf over. So you could get the rotate tool and rotate this around the red axis, but there's an easier way to do it. And what I'm going to do is single click on the object, right click, and flip along the blue axis. So flip along components blue. And you can see now that it flipped it. It basically inverted all the geometry along the blue axis. And the reason I picked blue is the vertical axis. So I wanted to flip vertically all of the geometry in this component. So now I can show you, if I double click on this component and push-pull the top of it, you'll see that the bottom shelf is going downward. So all future operations that we do on these components, on one of these two, it will be properly flipped. And we'll get into that by cutting dados on the bottom shelf, which will appear on the top shelf on this inside surface. So essentially the two pieces are mirrored now. Okay, so we've got the basics of the cabinet. Next thing I'm going to do is make these inner sides, and there's 4 of them. And the easiest thing to do is start with this outer piece, and it looks like these inner pieces are identical dimensions, but they differ in the fact that these inners are going to have 2 dados in it, where the outer sides only have 1. So the best strategy here is to copy these, make them instances of the same component, do the work on the outer. So we're going to cut these 2 rabbets, and then we'll make the inner pieces unique and cut matching sets of rabbets, dados, on the other side of the vertical sides. Okay, so the easiest way to do this, well, first off, let's look and see the distance between these cubbies is exactly 18¼ inches. So they're all evenly spaced. So if I make a copy of this side and move it directly on top of this other side, and then use the array command, which is either multiply or divide, I can make copies of this automatically, and they will all be spaced evenly. So easier shown than said. I'm going to move this, make a copy of it by tapping the control key, and I'm going to move it along this red axis. So I'll hold the shift key down to lock my axis and move it all the way to the outside and click. Now there are actually two copies, one on top of each other. And now I'm going to hit the divide key, and I am going to divide by 5 because there's 5 openings here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm dividing that move into 5 equal parts, and at the same time I am copying the piece. So let's check and see the result here. And it's 18 1/4 inside to inside. This is 18 1/4. So they're all spaced exactly the same, and that's what that divide command is going to do for you. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is make these shelves, and then we will cut all of the dados, starting with the 2 outsides and then making the insides. Okay, so basically I'm going to take advantage of drawing over this bottom shelf. So I'll hit R for rectangle, and I'll just trace over this bottom shelf. I'm going to hit escape and start over again. Let me get it right in that corner and go right to this corner and click. So now I've got a rectangle that's on top of that shelf, and you can kind of see that as you zoom in and out. The surfaces fight with each other. So you've got a rectangle of no thickness on top of another rectangle, and that's why you get this image fighting. So I'm going to do push pull this up, type in 3/4 of an inch, and then go to the space bar. So select tool, triple click, right click, and again I want to make this a component. Okay, now I can use the exact same trick I just used to space these shelf dividers. So I'll show you that all of these cubbies are 15 inches vertically, which allows us to use that divide command. This time I'm going to make 2 extra shelves. So I'm going to move this one down so that it's aligned to the bottom. I'm having a little trouble moving here. Let me lock my axis and click. Okay. And now I'm in the move tool again, and I'm going to tap control to make a copy, and I'm going to pick this upper point and move this all the way right on top of the top shelf. Okay. Now I can do my divide command, but I don't want to go grab another tool at this point or it won't work. I have to immediately follow a copy with a divide or multiply, which are called array commands. So I'm going to divide this by 1, 2, 3 openings. So I'll do /3, enter. And now I've made my copies, and they are automatically positioned so that the vertical dimension is equal between all of them. So those were nicely spaced out, and the next thing we need to do is actually resize this component so that it's actually recessed in 1/4 inch into our sides. So I'm going to double click on it to open it up, and I'll do a Control H to hide rest of model. And now conveniently you can see that I've got 4 copies. I've actually got 2 extra shelves on the top and bottom, but we'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to push this out or pull it out by 1/4 inch, and I'll go to the other side and pull that out by 1/4 inch, and you see that all 4 of those shelves resize themselves because they're components. So I'll click outside and close component. So that reminded us that there's an extra shelf here and an extra shelf here. So I'm going to click on one of them, delete, click on the other, delete. Okay, so now we need to cut the dados for these shelves, and I'm going to start here on this outside shelf. But now, since the rest of the model is hidden, I can't see where I want to cut my dados. So I'm going to hit Control H, my hotkey, to toggle off Hide Rest of Model. And now I can see where the shelf is. The vertical side is the piece, the component that's being edited. So I'll grab the rectangle tool and I'll draw over that intersection of the side and the shelf, and I'm going to push this all the way back, and now I've cut the first rabbet. R for rectangle, click in the upper left, click in the lower right, and push pull. And this is a shortcut for push pull. The last operation I did, I pushed it back 12 inches. So if I double click with the push pull tool, it's going to re-execute the last push-pull operation. So that pushed it back by 12 inches. And I will close this component. So the two sides and the four inner sides are identical components at this point. We can see that this outside one needs to be flipped around. And similar to flipping this top shelf, but this time we're going to flip along this red axis. So I'm going to single click on it to select it, right click, flip along red. Okay. And now it looks like we've got two sets of dados, but I think what's happening here is I forgot to delete the second copy when I moved one right on top of the other when we were doing the array command. So I'm just going to delete here, and there were indeed two copies there. So I actually ended up deleting the one that wasn't flipped. So I'm going to click on that, right click, flip along, components red, and now you can see that dado got flipped. Okay. But we're going to need two sets of dados. And if I hide this shelf, you can see there's no dado on that side. So a little aside here, I use hide and unhide frequently to examine stuff like this, and I definitely want it on a hotkey instead of having to click here and go up and say hide, and then if I want to unhide, I'd have to go back up here to edit, unhide last. So instead what I've done is I've set up hotkeys, and you can see that I've set up H for hide, and I've set up U for unhide last. So those are pretty handy hotkeys to set up. So I suggest you do hide and unhide as a shortcut key. Okay, so if we start cutting dados on this piece right here, the problem is those dados are also going to get on this outside piece. So all 6 of these vertical pieces are instances of the same component. And I can demonstrate that by double clicking on one, pulling it straight back, and you see all 6 of them are moving. So I'm going to hit escape, right click, close component to get out of that. So the way around that is I'm going to select these 4 inner sides, right click, and make unique. So now they are, because they were all selected at the same time, they're all copies of the same component, but they are in fact different than the 2 sides, the very outsides. So if I pull these, you'll see just the 4 inner ones are changing. I'm going to hit escape, right click, and close because I don't want to change those. Okay, so now we should be able to cut a dado here and a dado here and not affect the outer sides. So that's exactly what we'll do. I'll double click here, and same method, I'm going to get a rectangle by pressing R. I'm going to trace over that intersection, and I'm going to push this all the way back. And you can see that the other 3 vertical pieces have been dadoed automatically. And I'll do the same here. And now I'm going to use my double click on push pull, which will push it back 12 inches. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to finishing this cabinet. What we need to do is copy these shelf dividers into their slots. So we could do one at a time, but why not do them both? Because all of these datas are perfectly aligned. So I clicked on one, shift clicked on the other, M for move, and I'm going to pick this spot right here to move from, tap the control key to go into copy mode, and move this right here. Now if I can get the move done in one move operation, then I can use the array command. This time I'm going to use the multiply command. So I've made one copy here, but I want to do 2, 3, 4. I want 4 copies in total, including the first one that I just did. So I will hit star for multiply, 4, and enter. So that made 3 more identical copies and spaced them according to how I spaced the first one. So that's why it's important to get your move done in one operation, because it's going to take the last move operation that you did and use that again as it makes the array. Okay, so all of these shelves are the same same component, and I can prove that by pulling one up, and you'll see they'll all change. So I'm going to hit escape, right click, close. Okay, so let's just examine here. It looks like we have not done the dados on the bottom shelf. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to double click. I'm going to get a rectangle here and push pull and double click the push pull. And now an interesting thing happened. It pulled it out 12 inches. So it actually went in the wrong direction. So I will do a Control Z to undo that. And so I'm going to go back to push pull and manually push it back there. But now it should be in the right direction. So when I grab the rectangle tool and cut the next dado and press P for push pull and double click, it pushes it all the way back 12 inches. So I will just do that for the remaining dados and push pull. Okay, so because the top shelf is a copy of the same component, those dados got automatically cut. So I'm going to right click, close that bottom shelf, and now we have a cabinet almost completed except for the back. Okay, so the last thing we need to do on this lower cabinet is to make a back. And I'm going to hide this back to show you that it's actually recessed in. It's a 1/4 inch piece of plywood, but it's recessed in, so there's a rabbet on the side and on the tops, and also the shelves that we made and the inner dividers that we made are also recessed in, so they're actually 11 3/4 deep. So the beauty of components is we can do this rather quickly. So I'm going to double click on one of these shelf dividers and move it in by a 1/4 inch. And whoops, I did not press enter. 1/4, enter. And all of those shelves are pushed in now. And same with one of these vertical dividers, I can push that in. Instead of having to type in a 1/4 inch, I can just align it to the shelf, which was already pushed in a 1/4 inch. And that should do it. So I still have to cut the rabbets all around, but just one side and one top or bottom will do it because they're components. So I will double click on a side to open it up. And now we want a line. So I'm going to actually make a guideline here. And I'm going to push it in a 1/4 inch, which I know this dado is a 1/4 inch, so I can actually snap to that. Let me do that again. Okay, so I'm going to make a line that comes down here. And now I go to the push-pull tool, and I've actually got 3 surfaces to push-pull here. I've got one there, another there, and a third right there. Does not look like I got the third one. There it is. Okay. So that made the rabbit, the groove in the side, but you can see there's some extra geometry here, a couple extra lines. So I'm going to type E for erase, hold down the button, and then just swipe through those extra lines. I'll zoom out, see if there's one here. There is not. And so at every shelf, I've got these 2 extra lines to get rid of. Oops, I got the wrong side. Right here. Okay. All right. So that cut the rabbit on one of the sides, which, because of components, we should have the rabbit on the other side as well. And there it is. So now we'll do the rabbit on the bottom. And I can bring this in 1/4 of an inch and make a line. So I'm hitting L for line, and I'm panning over to the other side and clicking there. And now with my push-pull. Okay, so this is probably something you've run into all the time, and I just made a mistake here. I did not open this bottom component. So I go to push-pull, and it displays a little circle slash. So I just drew a line right here on top of this component right here. Not inside it, on top of it. So I'm going to delete that line, and now double click to open up my component and get my line tool by pressing L. And now I'll come back the other way and click. Okay, so P for push-pull. I can align this to this shelf. Oh, actually, I want to align it to the rabbit on the other side. And here I see that extra line, so I'm going to get these lines this time as I go. So push-pull, I can actually double-click. E for erase. Click on these extra geometry lines. P for push-pull. And click there, and push-pull that, erase these 2 extra lines, and one last one to go. Push-pull here, align it to the vertical piece, and click to erase that extra geometry. Okay, so now I will close my component by right-clicking on the outside of it. And you see I've got my rabbit there. I've got it on the side there. All very good. So now I can actually draw my back by using these other pieces. So I'm going to hit R for rectangle. I'm in this corner, and I start down to this opposite corner and click there. And then I can pull this back and align it to the back of the cabinet, which should be 1/4 inch. And if you look down in the distance window in the bottom right corner, you'll see that it is 1/4 inch. So I click. So now this back is not grouped, so I want to triple click, right click, and I could make this a component, but I know there's only one back in the model, so I'm going to make it a group. It's a little bit easier because you don't have to go through that naming dialog. Okay. So that is the complete bottom piece, bottom cabinet. And I'm going to show you one more shortcut key. I've got a couple of guidelines in here. I could go up to edit and delete guides, but I so frequently delete guides that I like to have a shortcut key for it. So I've set it up for G, and I just hit the G key and it erases the guides. Okay, so next up we will do the upper cabinet. Okay, so now we're going to do the upper cabinet. And one thing we're going to take advantage of here is the fact that this bottom and top piece are the same or almost the same as the bottom and top piece on the lower cabinet, except they have an extra set of dados in them for more dividers. So I'm going to start by copying this bottom shelf all the way to the top here, and then I'm going to measure this side piece, which is 13 1/4. So I'm going to get my rectangle tool and I'm going to draw right in this rabbet. So I'm going to start in the corner and go to this corner, and if I look in my dimensions window, I see that it's 3/4 by 12, which is exactly what I want. And then I'm going to pull it up 13 1/4 and hit enter. And then, of course, remember to triple click, right click, and make it a component. Okay, so I'm going to copy this component to the opposite side, and I lock in along the red axis, and then go all the way to the edge and click. Okay, so now I'm going to make a copy of this bottom piece and make it into a top right here, and we can see that the dados and rabbets are not oriented properly, so we want to flip this along the blue axis. So I'm going to single click, right click, and flip along blue. That's the vertical axis. And I'm going to move this, so M for move this down. And let's check to make sure we've got the overall height here properly set. So 12 3/4, 12 3/4. Great. All right, so if we look carefully at this cabinet, you'll see that there's a inner shelf that spans the entire distance. And let's see, from the top, that inner shelf is 4 inches down. So I'm going to make a 4-inch guideline, and that's where the top of that shelf should be. And I'm going to copy this shelf up to that point. So move, tap Control, and copy it. And remember, I've got 3 copies of the same component right now. So I do not want to start editing this, and you'll see that all of these guys would change. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is click on this, right click, and make unique. Now, the first thing I want to do is get rid of this tongue and turn it into just a 1/4 inch of extra material going into the side. So I'm going to do 2 operations at once. I'm going to double click on this, and I've got the rest of the model hidden. So I'm going to push this surface in. I'm going to erase this line, and then I'm going to pull the whole surface back a 1/4 inch. That's what's going to be inset into the sides. So I'll do the same on the other side of the shelf, push it in to align with the top, erase that line, and then pull this out a 1/4 inch. And click away from the component, right click, and close it. So now if we look at the edge here, we've got what we need on both sides. Okay, so I'm going to hit G to erase my guide, and I want to make a rabbet for this shelf, so I'll click on one of these 2 sides, and now I'm going to hit Control H to see the rest of the model, because I need to see that shelf in order to do what I'm doing here. So same operation we've done a bunch of times, a rectangle, push it all the way back to cut the dado, and then close the component. And on the other side of the cabinet, what do we have? We have this we have it cut. Actually, I didn't go all the way back. So let me fix that first. I did not push that back all the way. Now it's pushed back all the way. But it's oriented the wrong way. So we want to flip it along this axis. And I'll just zoom out and I'll see it's not green, so it's got to be the red axis. So I'm going to click on this, right click, and flip along red, and now the dado is on the inside. Perfect. Okay, so we're moving right along. All we need are these vertical pieces. So I think what I'll do is I'll make this first one, and I've got my top and bottom dados all ready to go. So I'm going to make a rectangle that starts on that upper left dado and goes to this lower right, and then I can push this back to the back side and click, and now I triple click on it to select all of it, right click and make component. And now what I need to do is move it into these dados. So I'm going to move one, and then I'm going to use the multiply command. So I tapped Control to go into copy mode, and I moved one, and now I want two more, so I'm going to do a times 3, total of 3 copies. Okay. Now if we look closely, each one of these sections is also divided. So we need our divider here, and then we'll eventually need to cut the dado. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select 4 of these guys, and I'm going to move them at once, and I'm going to try to get the center of this area. So I'm going to hit move, tap Control, and I want to start in the center of this vertical divider, and I want to keep it along that red axis. So I'm going to hold Shift down, and I want to locate the center of this line. I can't do it down here because that would be the center of the entire line, the entire width of the shelf. But here I can snap to the center of that section, which I did. So now, if everything went right, all of these should be spaced at the same amount. And 6. They're saying I actually did not do that right, so I'm going to undo that. Let me make sure I've got this set right. So 18 1/4 from here to here, that's proper. And I want this opening to be 8 3/4. So let me do that in a different way. I'm going to bring an 8 3/4 inch guideline out. So 8 3/4 inside to inside. So now I'm going to copy all of these guys. So I'm clicking, shift clicking to select all 4. M for move, tap Control, and I'm going to move this over to that guideline right there. Now let's check and see if we're getting 8 3/4 here, 8 3/4 here. So perfect. But I've got one more to go here. So I'm going to do the same thing. I will get my 8 3/4 guideline by typing that in, and I'm going to hit move, tap Control, and move a copy right to that edge of that guideline. Okay, so now I've got all 9 dividers done, but I need to cut some dados. I think I'm going to do the dividers on the bottom first and then cut all the dados at once. So let us do a divider right here, and then we'll eventually bring it over. So I'm going to go to the very back and pull this out 3/4 inch. And triple click and make it a component. Now you can see that this is not tall enough. If I move this over to this slot here, I need a 1/4 inch on the bottom and a 1/4 inch on the top to make it protrude into the shelf above and below it. So I'm going to double click on it, do a Control H to hide rest of model, push pull down 1/4 of an inch, and pull up 1/4 of an inch. Each time I was typing in 1/4 and pressing enter, and I will close my component. So that's the right component size. Let's see, let's do these all at once. So I'm going to do this in the method that we used on the lower cabinet. I'm going to move this right over the top of the side, and then I'm going to make a copy of it. So M for move, tap Control for copy, and I'm going to move it all the way to the other side. And then I'm going to divide by the number of openings I have here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I've got 9 dividers, so I've got 10 openings. So I type in /10, enter. And now I've got all 10 of them drawn, and they look to be in the right spot. So let's just check the dimensions. So 8 3/4, 8 3/4. Great. Okay, so all my dividers are in place, and now all I need to do is cut some extra dados. So let's cut the dados on this bottom shelf, and they should show up on the top shelf at the same time. And they're actually not going to show up here because we made this into a unique component. So we'll come back and cut those dados. Okay, so I'll double click to open it up, Control H to show the rest of the model, and rectangle over here, and then I'm going to push this to the very back, and rectangle over here, and double click that to the back. Same operation here. Double click. Oh. Well, I'm running into a problem here because I'm getting dados here on the bottom cabinet. So I'm going to hit my undo key, Control Z, and I'm going to undo all of those dados that I just did and get out of this component, and realizing now that I need to select the top and bottom of this upper cabinet, right click on it and make it unique. Otherwise I'm going to mess up this down here. So now these are unique. Now I should be able to do my dados without affecting the bottom shelves. And I will check, and that's good. Okay, so you've seen this a bunch of times, so I'm going to go rather quickly through this, but just showing you that if you use hotkeys, R for rect, P for push-pull, and double click with the push-pull, you can do this pretty darn quickly. And remember, I'm doing this automatically on the top piece. So great. We've got all those dados cut. Now we just need to do these dados on this middle shelf, which is a unique component. If I double click on that and pull it out, you see the other shelves are not pulling. And you also see that I have some dados cut already on the top surface, but nothing on the bottom. So let's try a speed method here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this, and I'm going to make a line in the back to the front, and another line back to front. And now we can push that straight up if we can see it. But the point is, I want to move those 2 lines, or copies of those 2 lines, to each of these vertical shelf positions. So what I'm going to do is click on this line, shift click on it, So now I've got both lines selected, and I can actually copy lines. So I hit M for move, Control for copy, and since I have these shelves in place, I can see exactly where I want to move it to. So right there, I've got one of them done, and now all I have to do is multiply by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 more of them. So I'm going to type in times 8, press enter. So I've got all of those lines done at once. And now I'm going to hide rest of model. And I can see that those lines are in place. I simply need to get the push-pull tool and push that up, type in a 1/4 inch. And now I can do my double click. And you can see that's aligned with the dado right above it. So I'm double clicking on all of these. And you can see this is a much quicker method than making those rectangles and pushing them all back individually. Okay, so I've got some more dados to do on this top. So let's go and let's do it this way. We will do a guideline, and I'm going to snap that guideline to the start of the dado, and I'm going to snap another guideline to the back side of that dado. And now I can do my 2 lines. So L for line, click and click. And I'm going to hit the space bar to go into select tool. I will click, shift click on the line. I don't want that surface, so shift click on that. So I've got my 2 lines, and now I'm going to go move, copy, so M, control, and I'm going to move these 2 lines along the red axis. So I'm going to lock it with my shift key, and then I'm going to come down here and click on this reference point and click. And I want to do a second one, a third one, a fourth one, so I'm going to do times 4, enter, and now I get all of those lines done at once. And now I can come with my push-pull tool, push down 1/4 inch, and from then on I'm going to double click to repeat that 1/4 inch push. And very quickly we cut the remaining dados. So I'm going to right click outside of the component to close it. I'm going to press G to erase my guidelines. And it looks like we've got everything done here on the top cabinet except for the back. Now, since we copied components from down here, we have some of the rabbiting done. It looks like the rabbiting is done on the top and bottom shelf and partially on this inner shelf. And it looks like we actually sized some of these dividers properly. So let's get it all cleaned up. I'm going to double click on this divider. I want to see the rest of the model, so I'll press Control H. And I will push this guy back here. And I'm seeing something. I'm seeing another one right here. So I forgot to delete this. So I've got another copy of that side right there. So I'll click on it and delete it. I may have one here. Yep. So I'm going to click on that and delete that. Remember, I made those extra copies in order to do the division command. Okay. So it looks like we're good here. What I want to do is I want to clean up this center component. And I'm going to push that back and then erase this line. So I've got some extra geometry here in between all of these dividers. So I'm just clicking with the erase tool right on that line to get rid of the extra geometry. Okay, so everything's looking good, but the sides now need to be pushed back by 1/4 inch. So I double clicked on one of the sides, and I don't want to push the whole thing back. I want a rabbet. I want a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch groove all the way around the outside. So I'm going to draw a line from here, and as long as I keep it on the axis, I'll be okay. And I'll start here. And as long as I keep it on the blue axis and I'm going to lock it with the shift key, I'll be all right. And I'm going to push this and align it back there. And I can see that it went a 1/4 inch back by looking in my distance box. And by doing so, I should also have the other side automatically cut. And it looks like we've got some extra geometry to get rid of here. So I'll hit E for erase, click, click to get rid of that. And this looks a little funny up here too, so let's check out and see what's going on there. Okay, it looks like there's no dado cut right there for some reason. So I'm going to double click on that and I'm going to hide rest of model. It looks like it got pushed all the way back, but just left a little extra piece. So I'm going to hit E for erase, and I'm just going to erase that extra line, and that fixed that. So this one looks a little funny. This is something that I haven't covered yet, but this face looks like it's a little darker than the rest. Same thing here and here. So what I'm going to do is right click and reverse face, and now it looks fine. Okay, so looks like I got rid of some geometry, so I'm going to undo, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. I actually ended up taking away too much extra geometry, but now I can see that I've got an extra line here, so I'm going to erase that and erase this one, erase that one. So I was going a little sloppy, a little too fast here, but it looks like that's all fixed up. Everything looks good there, so I'm going to right click and close that component. So we have the rabbit set for the back of the cabinet. I just need to draw a back. So pretty simple now. We've got a location for it. So R for rectangle. I'm going to start in that rabbit and I'm going to end inside this one. The trick here is to zoom in enough so you can see exactly where you want to be. And then I'll pull it out. I will reference this face, and that should be a 1/4 inch, which it is. I confirmed in the distance box. And now I'm going to triple click on that back and make that a group because there's only one instance of it. So that is the completed cabinet, and next we will get into applying materials to it, making the front hardwood edges, putting things on layers, and then doing scenes. Okay, so next up is to color this material, or assign a material to the components that we've made. So the easiest way to pop up the materials window is to click on the paint bucket. So on Windows or in Mac, you'll see that window somewhere on the screen. So in materials, I had already selected wood, but if you don't have it selected, go to wood. And then there is a cork board, which I used. So now I'm going to just single click on these components one at a time to fill them. Now, that seems a little laborious. There is another way of doing it, and that is to open up a component, triple click on it, and then assign this color to all of the faces. And you can see I can do all those components at once. If you ever want to color components individually, though, you probably want to stick with this method. It's not that laborious, where I'm just single clicking on each one of the components. I don't even have them selected. I don't have them open. I'm just setting their overall color to this material. And I got the back, and still missing these two components, and the upper back and the lower. Okay, so that all looks pretty good. Now we're going to draw the hardwood facing. So all of this facing, we're going to draw it in individual pieces. So this is all 3/4 of an inch in width and 3/4 of an inch thick. So I'm going to draw a rectangle on top of this top piece and align it right there and pull it out and type in 3/4. And I'm going to try to group that as much as I can. I will triple click, make that a component, and use that on the bottom as well. So M for move. Right now I'm going to get this point, tap Control to be in copy mode, and go down here. Okay. And then I'm going to do continuous pieces here on the two outsides. So same type of operation. I'll start my rectangle here and go down to here. Then pull this out, and I have a guide to snap it to right here. So that should be 3/4 of an inch. And then I'll hit the space bar, triple click, make that a component, create it, and then copy that vertical piece over to the other side and deposit that right there. Okay, so now let's see what we did in this original model. I did long horizontal pieces. So it looks like this piece, and this piece are all the same. This one's very similar, although it covers two thicknesses of plywood. So we'll start by making one for all of those, and then we'll make this one unique and resize it. So we can actually start with this component, as long as we're careful to make it unique. So I make a copy of this component. It's going to be too big, and I'm going to put it right there on the outside edge and also reference the top of this shelf, so it's in the right position now. But now, before I size it, I want to right click on it and make it unique so I don't affect this top or bottom hardwood edging. Now I can double click on it and push that all the way in and right click and close. Okay, so now I've got a component that I can copy to this position. That one we're going to have to make thicker, but we'll come back to that. And I'm going to tap the Control key, make another copy, so I'm referencing this edge and I'm also referencing that edge, and click. And I'll do one more of them. Tap Control to be in copy mode and come down and reference the top. Okay, so we're making some good progress on our hardwood edging here. But this guy has to be twice as thick, 1.5 inches, or twice as tall. So I'm going to double click on him. Nope, I don't want to do that. I'll hit escape. First thing, I want to make it unique because I don't want to affect these other trim pieces. I'll double click on it now. I'll pull it down to the bottom of that cabinet and right click and close. Okay, so let's do another instance of copying this component, because most of what I need is already drawn here. So I'm going to make a copy of it, bring that over here, align it to this edge, which is great, lock it in, and then align it to this face and click. Okay, So this is way too long. So first make it unique, and then double click on it and push it all the way up to right here. And click away from it, right click away from it, and close it. So what I'm going to do is make copies going this way, and then I'm going to copy it back down. So since these are evenly spaced, I'm going to go to my Move tool, tap Control to be in copy mode, and align this right here to that inside edge and click. And now I want to use my multiplier array. So I want 2 more, so that's 3 in total. So times 3, enter. Okay. And now I can reproduce all of these guys by shift clicking on them, selecting them one at a time. So I've got 4 of them selected. I'm going to hit the Move key, M, tap Control for copy, and move this right down here and click. And now I want another copy going vertically, so I'm going to do times 2, and that generated the bottom copy. So let's do a similar operation up here. We will copy one of these components even though it's the wrong size, and I'm going to tap my Control key and I'll put it right here. So I'm referencing this edge, and I'm going to hold shift, and then I'm going to reference, let me get it in the right spot. Looks like I didn't click on the right spot to start with. So if I get this outside edge, I can get it locked on that edge, and then I can also reference this face and get it locked in that plane all at once. Okay, so got to remember to make it unique, and double click to open it up and change its size so that it works for this upper cubby, and close that component. And now I'm going to copy this guy using the multiplier again, and I'm going to move it and reference this edge. And then now I'm just going to experiment. I'm going to type in times 10. That was too much, so I'm going to type in times 9, and actually times 8 because I don't need one on the very end. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is select these vertical hardwood trim pieces. So I'm shift clicking on each one of them. And then I'm going to copy these. So M for move, Control for copy, move it straight down and click. And now all of them are selected, so I can click on any one of them, actually right click on any one of them and select Make Unique. So all of those are copies of the same component now. And now I can double click on any one of them, pull that down, reference this edge, and I've got all of that trimmed on. Okay, so the last thing is to apply a material to this trim. So I'm going to pick cherry from my materials and simply click on, oops, I clicked the wrong surface, so I'm going to Control Z to undo that. And I'm going to zoom in so that I can see what I'm doing here. And I'm going to color each one of these faces. Now, if I was a little smarter, I would have applied this material to the very first one before I made copies, and then I wouldn't have to do this operation. But fairly easy, especially with these bigger pieces. And almost done. Oh, did the wrong one, so Control Z to undo that. And there we go. So we now have a finished cabinet, and the next thing to do is to put pieces on layers and then also generate these scene tabs. Okay, so if you started with this finished model like I did and then recreated a new version of it right next door, you already have these scene tabs and you already have layers set up. So what I'm going to do is delete all of the layers, So I go to the Layers panel, which in the Windows version is in this default tray, which you can display. If it's not displayed, you can show tray here. Mine is displayed already. On the Mac, you would go to Window, Layers. Okay, so I'm going to click in the Backs layer, and I'm going to click, Shift click into the Sides layer and hit delete. So I'm going to delete all of those layers at once. And I'm also going to delete the contents of the layers. So everything that we created in the reproduced model went into layer 0 because this radio button was set, and that's where all the geometry and components and groups are going to go automatically wherever this radio button is set to, which I like to leave always on layer 0. So the contents of all these other layers are this original model. So I'm going to delete all of that at once. All right, so I've got just layer 0. And I've also got these scene tabs, which I want to get rid of and show you how to make those. So I'm going to go to the Scenes window. On a Mac, you would go to Window Scenes. On a PC, go to the default tray and open up Scenes. And I'm just going to delete each one of these one by one. Let's see if I can shift click on this. Yes, you can. So you can delete a bunch of them at once. Okay. So now we have no scenes. And let's start making a scene here. So I'm going to click on plus and go down here and name it Working. So my working scene is just not a display scene, just I want to leave the camera in perspective mode and be able to change this model anytime I need to. We'll come back to the other scenes after we make layers. So I'm going to go to the Layers window, and I'm going to start with the back. I'm going to make a backs layer because that's one thing you would want to turn off. So I'm going to name that. I hit the plus, circle plus to make a new layer, and backs is set. So now I'm going to click and shift click on these two backs. So they're blue highlighted. And I'm going to go to the Entity Info window, which on the Mac you can go to Window, Entity Info. On the PC it's in your default tray. And now I will see this layer backs, and I assign to it. So if I turn the visibility of backs off, I've hidden the back, which is great. I might want to do that while I'm generating a scene so that I can get dimensions for the cabinet. Another thing you'd want to do is turn this hardwood edging off. So let's make a layer called Edging. So I went up and clicked on plus and then typed in edging. And now I want to get all of this hardwood edging. So I could click on this, shift click, one at a time. That's one way of doing it. Another faster way, which might be a little tricky here, is to try to select everything in this plane with the marquee select. So to be successful here, I'm going to get a side view. Let's see. Okay, so this little view button gave me a left view, and I'm going to go to the camera and I'm going to go into parallel projection. So now it's straight on, and now if I use the select tool and I'm going to go from left to right, and I want to get over the hardwood edging. The fact that I went from left to right means I've got to totally enclose something to select it. And it looks like I did that correctly. the hardwood edging is only 3/4 of an inch. So when I come in from this side and I go beyond all the hardwood edging, but not all the way into the plywood pieces, I can select all that hardwood edging. So I'm going to go back to our perspective view on our camera, and all the hardwood edging is selected, so I can go to the layer that says edging. And now if I turn that layer off, I can see I can control the visibility of the hardwood edging. And same with the backs. So I'm going to leave those two new layers turned off. Okay, so now let's make one for the sides. So we'll call that sides. And I'm going to click, shift click, shift click, shift click, and go up to my entity info and select sides, and then turn that layer off. So it's a good idea when you make a layer to turn it off, and then you see the remaining pieces. So I'm going to call these dividers horizontal, and I'm going to call these dividers vertical. So two separate layers, plus I'll type in dividers -H, and I'll make a second layer here, dividers -V. Okay, so now I'm going to select my horizontal dividers by shift clicking on them. And there's 10 of them. So I shift clicked on all 10. I go up to the entity info and assign those 10 to the dividers horizontal layer, and then turn that layer off. And same thing with these vertical dividers. I'll shift click on all of those. And I can do this in multiple steps. Let's say I get halfway through, I can assign that to my vertical dividers, and I'll actually turn that off. And now when I assign the rest of these guys, they'll automatically hide because I've got the layer that they're going to invisible. So I shift clicked on all of those, and I'm going to assign those in the entity info box to my vertical dividers. So now I've got what I'll call shelves. Let's call all these horizontal pieces shelves. So I'm going to make a layer, call it shelves, and in this time I'm going to turn its visibility off in advance. So when I assign any one of these pieces to my shelves, you'll see it hide because its visibility is turned off. So I'll get the remaining 4 by shift clicking on them and then assigning them to the shelves layer. So all I have are these vertical, I don't know what you would call them. Let's call them rails for lack of a better term. I guess they would be stiles, right? That would be a vertical piece. Okay, so let's call those stiles. And I'm going to assign those to the stiles layer, and then I hide those. So now I can kind of put this thing together by doing pieces at a time. Now, I don't want that in sides. I've assigned that to the wrong layer. So all I have turned on here is sides, and I'm seeing something that's obviously not a side. So I'm going to go ahead and assign that to, what do we call it? Our shelves. Okay. So now I'm just seeing 4 sides in the sides layer. I'll turn that off. I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shelves. That's good. There's my hardwood edging. Turn that off. My vertical dividers, my horizontal dividers, and my backs. So if I want to turn all these layers on, I can click on backs. Let me try that again. Click on backs, shift click on styles, turn any of these visible layers on, and they all go on. Okay, so I'll click outside of this. right. So now we want some scenes, and what I'd like to do is kind of deconstruct this model from scene to scene. So the working scene is showing everything. Let me go to the Scenes tab, and we'll make a new scene, and we'll call it No Edging. So basically I want everything in view except I want to turn off the hardwood edging. So I'm going to go back to my Layers panel and I'm going to click on Edging so that that is invisible. And I'll go up to my Scene tab, I will right click on it and update it. So now if I go to the working layer, I see the hardwood edge. If I go to the No Edging tab, I don't see the hardwood edging. Now if you want this not to animate, see how we changed our camera location from one to another? Here's a little trick. So if I go to edging, and now I'm going to undo, it says previous camera view. It's a tool. So if I do a previous camera view and then right click and update, when I go back and forth now, I'm in the exact same camera position. Okay. So let's add one more. Let's get rid of the backs now. So I'm going to add another scene, and I'm going to call this No Back, or No Backs. Same thing, I'm going to go up to my Layers panel and I'm going to turn off the backs. And then let me show you, if I don't update the Scene tab, what's going to happen here. So I made a scene and then I changed some visibility within the scene. And if I go back to my No Edging and then back to the backs, I did not update the scene, so it did not know to keep the backs turned off. So I'll turn off the backs again in the Layers panel, right click and update the Scene tab. And now when I go to No Edging and No Backs, everything is well. So let me add a couple of more scenes and we'll be all done. So I'm going to add one with, and I'm going to call it No Dividers. Okay. So now I'm going to turn off my horizontal dividers and turn off my vertical dividers and right click and update this scene. And now in this scene you can see all of the dados. So that's handy. Okay, so I'm going to do just two more scenes. I would like to see the entire cabinet, except for the hardwood edging, from a front-on view. So I'm going to call this Elevation. So I will make a new scene. I'll call it, let me call it Front Elevation. I'll just call it Front. So it's going to be a front elevation. And now what I want to do is use one of these view buttons, and this looks right, except I want to go to Camera and go into Parallel Projection. Now actually what I'm seeing now is the back, because the back was rabbited. The back of the cabinet was rabbited for the back pieces. So that's not the view I want. That is the front view that I want. Okay. So I'm going to right click and update on the front view so I can see all the rabbits. And I'm also going to get a side view. So I click on the Side tab, make a new scene. I'm going to call that Side, and I'm going to update that scene. Okay, so very quickly we can navigate this model going from the front to the side, or this perspective view that adds different components back into the model. So you can kind of play around with that, group things and layers the way you want, make scenes the way you want, and sometimes, actually most of the time, it's advantageous to do this as you're making a model, because then you can control these layers and turn things on and off without having to individually hide them. Okay, well that's it for the Cubbies model. And we will talk again next Wednesday night. Thank you. Bye-bye.